figure it out later. Just start and figure it out later. You'll screw up, and that's fine. I was 18 years old, hanging out in a hookah lounge like you do when you're 18. And the owner had seen me before, and he's like, I would sit there with my friends, and we would do our homework. And he came up to me, and he's like, "Hey, you guys, you're a computer guy, right?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm a computer guy." And he's like, "Can you make a website for my new grocery store that I'm opening up?" I'd never made a website or really thought too critically about one before. I'm like, "Yeah, I can do that." So I sat down with him. I wrote up this contract. I created an LLC, some cheesy name. And I'm like, "Yeah, pay me half up front. Give me $1,000. I'll make you this grocery store website. I'll do it in 2 weeks." I made up every one of those numbers, thought that they just made sense and sounded right. I was sure I could do it because I'm like, there's got to be some template or something I can use. Went horribly. I screwed that thing up so badly. I turned it into him. The person I hired to do it with the down payment failed, so I ended up doing it myself. And I did it badly because little did I know it's actually really hard to make a grocery store website. So I ended up doing a bad job, turned it into them. They hated it. So I ended up giving them their money back. So now I'm out the 500 that I already spent on a developer to do this badly. But I pretty much figured out how to make websites that aren't that hard. If it was 10% easier, I could have done it. So that got me thinking, okay, I need to be a little bit more of a practitioner in order to do this, at least for the start. So when people ask me, how do you start? My answer is figure it out later. Just start and figure it out later. You'll screw up, and that's fine. Don't charge $10,000 for your first project. You can maybe take something up front, but be prepared to refund it if it doesn't go well. You can do a little bit of research, but really just don't overthink it. Make your first sale, and you will be forced to figure out the rest of the details later.
100%. Yeah, get into something, do something, and just start. People reach out and they're like, "Oh, I'm thinking about this or this." I'm like, "Just do it. Start." And it's they come back and they're like, "It didn't work." And I'm like, "Perfect. Now we know that that's not it, right?" But now did you learn some things? Yep. I think of this. I think this. Just like you did. You just said, "Well, I knew I wasn't going to focus on grocery stores, and I knew I wasn't going to do this, and I learned about outsourcing." You did, you learned all of that really in weeks. And if you would have focused on, okay, let me get my logo first, and let me build myself a website first, and all those kind of things, you would have never learned those things, and it would have just been years and years and years of spinning your wheels. And I think so many people get stuck in that trap of just not starting. For me, what I did is I quit my job. So I literally just said, I had a job that was paying me good money, and I just quit. I just said, all right, I'm quitting. I'm starting this marketing thing. I'm going to do email marketing. I happened to have somebody who had a framework on how to send the emails and stuff, and I paid them for the software. So they had some structure there. But within a year, I was adding services, you know what I mean? I was working outside of that. I eventually switched off of their software and found a more cost-effective option. And it only happened, I had to go get sales so I could feed myself, right? And my kids. So it's so important. Starting is so important. If you spin your wheels there, you will get stuck. And I can't stress that part enough. So how long was it until you actually had a business? So from that grocery store website to, okay, now I actually have a business. I have a team. I'm getting it. How long was that?
I made my first hire. This was before I started my company over from scratch. So it ended up being not as great of a business as I thought. But I probably made my first hire 2 years after that day. Well, actually, I made my first hire that day, right? When I tried to hire someone for the first time. But I ended up, I experimented with outsourcing a couple of times too, in between there. But really, when I got someone who was working for me full time, it was about 2 years later. I was doing everything myself until that point, pretty much.
Got it. And so,
which in retrospect, I would have done much sooner.
Yeah. So you could have sped that up sooner. If you went back and did it again, it would be much faster, right?
Absolutely, because you don't need to hire someone full time to start. You can hire someone on a project basis and have it be immediately profitable.
Well, plus what year was that?
2017.
Got it. Yeah. So it's so much easier to hire VAs and stuff like that. There's so many more services. I remember when I first hired somebody online, it you're risking everything, right? Like it was really hard to do, and you're like crossing your fingers that they don't rob you, you know what I mean, and take your money. So yeah, it's so much easier now with these middle companies and lots of options out there to be able to help people with the virtual assistant type model and getting people in part-time. That's huge. So how many are most of your employees in the States, or are they overseas?
We're everywhere. All of our designers are in the US, but I would take designers in other countries as long as they were native English speakers. And then I've got some staff in South America. We've got a few other one-off positions here in the States, like my accountant and like our integrations person. And then we've got a lot of our development team in the Philippines. We've got some specific roles, like for specific parts of projects that we'll do in India.
Do you guys all work at the same time? Do you like require people that they be on the clock at the same time, or do you?
It depends. Some positions are more flexible than others, but there are some people who we pay a premium to for them to work a night shift for them.
Got it. And then where do you, to get to your goal and the 4-year target, how big of a team are you going to have to make that happen?
It's going to be about 60 people.
Got it. Cool. That's exciting.
It is. It's like I was looking at the org chart on Friday and I was like, this is insane. I can't believe I'm trying to build this. But then I looked at it and I dissected each little piece of it. I'm like, it's insane when you look at the whole, but when you look at each piece, it's completely logical. Like, and the numbers work out. So what the art of it is going to be is figuring out in which order to do the right things. And, you know, that's what I'm working on. That's my job.
I've heard it said it's like the slinky of business, right? So a slinky goes like this, up or down, right? So it's at first it's always marketing, right? Like, how am I going to get a client? So your marketing happened in a guy's, establishment, and he wanted a grocery store website. So that was your marketing. And then it's sales, which you happen to close right there, right? Then it's fulfillment, right? So you got to fulfill this thing. You got to build it. How long is that going to take? And are you on the same page with sales, or did sales sell something that's totally different than operations, or onboarding wanted? Then from there, it's how do you maintain that relationship or keep growing that relationship or get referrals, and then you start the process over again, right? Like that's how it always goes. And I think the interesting thing about it is, and you've been doing this for a while, is it's going to break. Like, whatever you build now is going to break. Like, it's not going to hold up at 4x or 5x. And you really have to get comfortable with that. How do you deal with that side of it, of like failing and disappointing your clients or disappointing your team members and not having all the answers?
Disappointing the clients that's the easiest one to solve. You just give them their money back. It's something that I learned from my grandfather. Like, you always want to be on the right side of fair. You never want to be, the last thing you ever want to put into question is your integrity. So that's the easiest one to solve. The hardest one to solve is disappointing your team when you are wrong about who you need for a role and you hire the wrong person and they like leave their job to come work for you and it doesn't work. And you're like, oh my God, did I just ruin this person's life? Like, that's the worst thing that can happen to you in business. In my opinion, like, I think I've made every single mistake, and that's my least favorite one.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, that's a tough one. Go ahead.
So that's one. The other thing is I try to bounce my ideas off people before I do things. So I've got a couple people on my team who are really good systems people. So before I implement something, I'll talk to them and I'll say like, hey, does this make sense? And luckily we've got a culture where they're not afraid to shoot my ideas down.
That's
awesome.
Yeah,
that sucks sometimes, but it's awesome too. And then I've also got a coach who I hired to talk me through. He's about twice my size, so usually he'll run into a stumbling block before I do.
Oh, that's really good.